When I was a field journalist, I was invited by the State Department. This is something that taxpayer money is used to invite journalists from developing countries to go and cover and see the US and see the American dream. And then you realize that the American dream is just a war machine.
Hello everyone, I'm Rania Khalek and this is Dispatches. More than 10 months into the US-Israeli genocide in Gaza, it seems the debate hasn't changed. We're put in a position where we have to convince people that Arab life does in fact matter, that it's not okay to murder hundreds of Palestinians a day, that colonialism, supremacy, and imperialism are violent and wrong, and people have a right to defend against it, that opposing Israeli genocide is not a form of bigotry, that our system is broken. Meanwhile, the destruction in Gaza continues seemingly without end, as the heart-shattering and infuriating images of shredded children and the excuses for crushing them continue. And just when you think the horrors, the dehumanization, the hate, and the media justifications can't get worse, they do. How do we maintain hope and our sanity in such circumstances? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Egyptian activist and podcaster Rahma Zein. But before we jump into it, this is just part of this episode. The full interview is available to Breakthrough News members only. You can become a member at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. And as always, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you get a notification whenever we post new content. Rahma, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Rania. I you know how much I love you.
Well, I love you too. The feeling's mutual, and I feel so honored to have you on. I wanted to start off by asking you to react to a soundbite. And I'm only asking you to react to this because we just finished the Democratic National Convention, which I'm sure you saw people talking about all over the internet. And Kamala Harris, who's the...
I think I know the clip. I already know the soundbite.
Oh, okay. Well, you probably do.
Yeah.
She basically, in her speech last night, accepting the nomination, she made a comment about the issue, the genocide in Gaza. Of course, she did not call it a genocide, but I'm just going to play what she said. And, you know, we can respond from there. Here's Kamala Harris.
With respect to the war in Gaza, President Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done. And let me be clear. I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself. And I will always ensure Israel has the ability to defend
itself.
Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7th, including unspeakable sexual violence and the massacre of young people at a music festival. At the same time, what has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost. Desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self.
All right, so she said a lot there, but also not very much. What's your...
That is U.S. politics during press conferences. To say a lot, but nothing at all.
Exactly. So yeah, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Honestly, this is what's expected. She's appeasing the Israeli lobby, which has just showed its chokehold on U.S. politics. She is very well aware that it is a politics. They are the ones sending the weapons. They know what's happening on the ground in Palestine. So she is simply appeasing the donors. She knows, and this is something we've seen before when Biden was having his debate with Trump. It was absolutely absurd that they were fighting as to who is more Palestinian than the other and using it as a slur. So
Yeah.
she has to tread very carefully if she's to say anything for the Palestinian cause. She's even, one can argue that she's even taken a risk speaking up. Well, I wouldn't call it speaking up, but even mentioning the treading a sort of a surface level comment on the atrocities in Gaza. But they are made to appease the Israeli lobby, which has shown just how strong they are. They are puppeteering U.S. politics.
Yeah. And I know it also really infuriates me the fact that the issue of sexual violence keeps coming up over and over again in the context of, oh, Palestinians just like raped everybody because they're just brutish, uncivilized people. Whereas we have all this evidence, and you even have Israelis going on their own media outlets bragging about raping Palestinians as a weapon of torture. Justifying it, saying it should happen more, that it's a fair form. And you have a poll coming out showing a majority of Israelis think that it's okay to use rape against Palestinians to torture them. And, you know, you and I are both Arab women. I think we're both quite used to witnessing Western countries, Western governments, I should say, use our bodies, women's bodies in the region, and the issue of women's rights to justify imperialism and war. And then to see that, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised, but to see this is just like, this is actually proven. The rapists are confessing that they are doing it. We know it's happening against Palestinians, against this group of Arabs. And you hear nothing from any of the officials. In fact, you continue to hear this libel. It's a blood libel at this point, smearing Palestinians as if they're the rapists, and nothing said about what's actually happening. It's just the most insane kind of gaslight. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm going insane.
I think this is why a lot of people are going insane, realizing how dangerous the double standards are. And this has been the case. You see Israeli politicians talking about Palestinians as human animals, making it as if it's prideful to be a settler. And they're the ones literally confessing their crimes. But what you have is you have PR using as many tools as possible to hide, to do a sort of crisis management for Israel. For example, we just saw the BBC write this one title about the mother whose 6 kids got slaughtered by Israel, and it was nurse says mother and her children killed. Who killed them? And this has been the status quo for Israel. And even with the founding of Israel, you had their previous so-called president who had said, I think his quote was, "In spying or in war, the sort of the what I'm going to sort of reword what he said, but what he basically was saying is, the illusion that you're winning or the illusion of something is a success." And that's been their status quo, that they're democratic, but they're a Jewish only state. So it's always been this paradox. It's always been this double standard. But their PR, which is of course honed in by APEC, is so strong and constantly reiterates these certain key messages that they keep saying, so that when you show them footage of Palestinians being raped by so-called IDF soldiers, their answer is, but Hamas. But if we don't defend Israel, suddenly the Middle East is going to implode and then explode onto us. And this is something that you talk to people and they genuinely believe this is the case. They don't see that Israel is bombing their own hostages because there's no sense in how they're bombing. So the continuous double standards are, of course, frustrating, but again, they are expected. This is what they've been doing. And this is why we keep saying the solution is to own the narrative. Because a lot of people, I blame myself, because I've been silent for so long, because you're always expecting someone's going to do something about it. You know what? You step in. Every individual now has a responsibility to step in and speak the truth and fight this narrative that has been superseding for a very long time.
You know, I'm curious. You mentioned you feel like, okay, you've been silent for a long time. I'm curious your personal sort of like history and evolution. I mean, you're Egyptian, so I imagine you've had a sense of this issue your entire life. I mean, you're right next to it, literally. I mean, for me, I grew up in a Lebanese family, so I always understood Palestine. I always understood Israel as a very big threat to the region. I always understood Israel as a country that bombs my family. How did you grow up understanding Israel? And then also, like when you mentioned you felt like you were silent before, what made you change the way you relate to this issue publicly?
So honestly, a lot of it has to do with my family. So my mother was a field journalist. My grandfather was the editor in chief. My grandmother was also in media, and they were very well aware. And I grew up with stories that my grandfather would tell me, and he would tell me stories of the Israeli intelligence and how they operate and how they look at your vices and use them against you. How when somebody speaks up, they make sure to discredit them later on, and you start to realize that this entity was literally based on or built on espionage and it's sort of to co-opt. It's insane the things that you grow up learning about what is literally 3 kilometers away happening if you're in Sinai, for example. So definitively, my family did politicize me from an early stage, but also just seeing how unaware some Americans are, how unaware a lot of people in the West are. And this is why a lot of people who are in the same case as mine, which there are many, are very shocked, because there's constantly this assumption of, if the world really knows what they're doing, then definitely this isn't going to happen. And what is the scariest thing to a lot of us is now there's no excuse not to know. The history is all there. Their actions, they don't need to speak. Like you just mentioned, they are boasting their crimes. If there is anything more audacious and dangerous and scary than a soldier, and I keep reiterating this because it really scares me and makes my blood boil when I see these so-called soldiers playing with children's toys who are dead or displaced. This is unhinged. And that for that to be justified. So both cases are bad. The action and the inaction, the action and the justification, they're both equally dangerous, and they're both equally shocking.
Yeah, I think it's also really scary the way that people like us are put in this position where, and I've seen you do it a lot because you've been on Western media, and you're put in this position where it's almost like you're talking to a child, and you're having to explain that like killing this group of people is not okay. Killing their children is not okay. It's like, it's just, I don't know. Like it doesn't. It seems like a debate that we shouldn't have to have. Like we shouldn't be having to debate.
This is something that is very on point. This no longer should be entertained, because debating something means there's something to debate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Killing people so mercilessly and spitefully as we are witnessing by the hour is not to be justified. There is nothing that justifies this. There is nothing that justifies this obvious spite. It's not just killing, it's torturing. We are watching the torturing of a people and debating and discussing and commenting and posting and liking. Like this past week, I thought to myself, what am I even? I'm collaborating on everything, but what's left to say? What is there to talk about? It is so insane and unhinged, as you say, to the extent that you almost feel that this was something pre-planned and that it's en route to a certain goal and it's just unhinged. And there are little bits of pieces of PR that you see here and there so that you don't you don't criminalize yourself so much because it is so heinous, but it, because of how audacious it is, spiteful it is, and so obvious that simple Palestinian existence is resistance, nothing to do with the hostages, nothing to do with Hamas. If you were to put whoever, this would still be the case. Because it is so obviously the case, you feel honestly that it was something that was pre-planned, and this is what's to happen to finally put the Palestinian plight to an end. And that is why talking and doing as much as you can is of the essence, and empowering your own, at least for the longevity of this fight.
Yeah, and I do think that when it comes to the issue of speaking out, I mean, it's been over 10 months. At this point, if someone hasn't spoken out, either they don't care or they're more worried about their career than about the fact that there's a Holocaust happening in Gaza. But I wanted to ask you about that because you're a pretty well-known person and you do take a risk by saying the kinds of things you do, because I mean, obviously that can be used against you. It can maybe get in the way of you getting certain jobs. There's lots of consequences, right? We know the speaking out on this issue. I guess what would be your message to people who maybe they know what's happening, they know it's wrong, but they have been maybe hesitant, reluctant to say much, to do much? I mean, maybe one reason might be because people are like, well, I'm one person, what does it matter? But also, there's a fear of the consequences for if you speak out.
Well, I have a great relationship with my boss, and
That's
I'm
good.
saying that in public for her. No, I'm joking.
If you're listening,
I'm not this person. I'm not this person. We just genuinely have like a good, I love my job. I love the people I work with. And they stood by me, they stood by me. As long as I get my deadlines on time, I'm good. They stood by me. So I didn't have this kind of course, I had security issues and life is falling apart. No, but that being said, I was just talking to a friend of mine. It's worth it. What is the point? And this was something that was so thrown at you, this consumerist lifestyle, this gluttonous lifestyle where you're so distracted and so and made to be unaware. And then when you speak up, you're shunned or you're looked at strange. But at one point, who cares? Even speak up because you're for yourself, to appease your own heart and mind and soul. I mean, what is the point of going on when you're seeing images hourly of heads of babies blown up, of people, of voice notes, of people crying in fear, of people in complete despair? And when you watch, you see they're not even thinking of the other or the enemy. They're just asking why. They're saying Alhamdulillah, and they're really not hateful. They're angry, they're hurt, they're confused, but never hateful. And that's our I believe, our culture or our belief system. And that's another thing, to be angry but not to be hateful, and also not to judge. I'll give you a small example. I have this friend of mine who works in the United Nations, and I went on this lecture of what she's not doing and how could she sleep at night. And she waited for me to finish my vent. And then she told me of the things that she is doing inside in the kitchen. So I realized she is doing a lot. She may not be vocal on social media, but she is doing something. So I do not judge, because who am I and what am I doing as well? At the end of the day, am I doing enough? Am I doing the right thing? So this is always something that is debatable. And I'm not an entity. I'm not an institution. I'm not an organization. So kindness during this plight is important. So instead, when you see someone who's not doing, I'm not going to fixate on this detrimental thought that my favorite actor didn't speak up. The
Right.
heck with him. That is that person's problem, that they are. Because I'm sympathetic towards cowards. It's something that just يعني ماشي عارفة
Haram.
حرام اللي هو بجد مش قادر تتكلم.
I love the condescension.
مش it's not even condescending, بس اللي هو يعني I know someone who was like, but I can't because my acting career. And I said, I don't think it's your career that's the problem. I think it's the skill of acting that's the issue. That would be the problem. Alhamdulillah, you know,
Nice
if you,
honesty.
you know, بس who is doing? At the end of the day, when you think about it, who is taking this action? Unless you're in Gaza and you're really, then start passing on judgment here and there. So instead of wasting my time in this detrimental spiral, because it upsets me, it upsets me when I think of these thought leaders who are not speaking up, when these leaders are not speaking. It is something that hurts. It hurts because you want to be in a position of influence. Then it's of even understanding better what exactly is happening, because it has come to a point where it is absolutely insane. So instead of wasting my time with the ones who don't, I fixate on the ones who are, how to help them out, what to see, how we can move forward, how to be constructive. And the ones who aren't, or who are, I pity them, because also this is a mindset issue. A lot of people, if they wake up to what's happening in Palestine, they will have to face their own racism, their own inferiority complex. If they're seeing the West on this pedestal, they're going to face their whole identity, maybe. And maybe some people are just not ready for that. When you're ready, Habibi, come sit next to me, yalla,
We're here. I mean, you're definitely more generous on this than I am. I get really frustrated. And maybe this is because I'm in Lebanon. Most of the time, I get really frustrated here because like half the country is being bombed, right? And there's a lot of people who, it's very easy in Lebanon. Like we were talking about this before we started recording. It's very easy when you're in a situation like this where, only one area is being affected and you're in the area that's not being affected. It's very easy to just forget about it and to live in a bubble. Yeah. But there are a lot of people who, because they get to live in that bubble, it's like you would have no idea there was anything happening. They never use their platforms to say anything. And I'm not even really sure like it's Lebanon, like what consequences they're going to be if you speak out for the fact that your country is being bombed. So I get really frustrated with that. But I think it is a really healthy way to look at it, is like, well, focus on the people who are using their platforms and their voices to say something. But, you mentioned people being scared to kind of come to terms with perhaps the fact that they have the West on a pedestal or their own identities and all these things. And, I saw you a few months ago in the West, I saw you in LA, and you gave this like incredible fiery speech. Just for those who are watching, it was at UCLA. It was before the encampment was destroyed. And everybody, I think there was a bunch of Zionists there who were like outside the encampment, who were like trolling and chanting and saying stupid things. And then you showed up and you like took this like microphone and you like just went on this rant, and it was so good. Everybody was so fired up. It completely drowned out these like Zionist trolls. It was really incredible. I mean that. Like I was ready to, I was ready to go do whatever, protest, whatever. But you spent some time in the US over the last few months. You saw the encampments, but you probably also saw how detached people can be in a place that's funding genocide. So I guess I'm just curious, post October 7th, this genocide, has your view of the US changed at all? Your, I guess, maybe interactions with Americans or the way that you interact with the culture itself shifted at all as you kind of see, yes, there's the protest side of it, but there's also this other side of it where people are just living their lives and don't care about what their government's doing?
Okay, this is a very interesting point. I'm going to say two parts to this question. The first answer regarding the UCLA protest, it is intertwined with what you were saying about people speaking up and not being happy. So everything is intertwined. The sum of the parts equals the whole, which is a problem because it then becomes very effective to oppress. So what happens with these protests? You have media being so cunning that they say the protesters disturbing the students, What does this do? This isolates the protesters as if they're not the students. The protesters are the students. They call them anti Semitic. They say they're dangerous. On the other side, you have the Zionist camp. You were there. You saw just how violent they are, using torture music that they use with the Palestinians who are kidnapped. They have I don't know, over $10,000 made stage. They have their own private security called Apex. They unleash these lab mice on the students protesting for freedom. Complete insanity. And you have the media justifying and villainizing the students who are saying killing kids is wrong. Why are we studying international law if it's not going to be implemented? What on earth is the point? It's only to have a seat on your table. To heck with it. So, but then what does this then affect? The families in LA who would want to help these students, who can fund, who can send money, who can even be there morally. Why? Because they're scared to now be associated with protesters who've been dubbed anti-Semitic, infiltrated, which is definitively not the case. So it all plays into creating this isolation. When we say empower and don't be so apologetic and appeasing, take the risk as a powerful family who has the amenities to help these students, go help these students. Don't just clap from far away. Physically be there. You grab the microphone and go talk to these students. Go hear them. How can we help you? Legally, you're getting suspended. A lot of these students are scared to speak up because they're there on a scholarship, because their parents are not agreeing. Now, so it's all intertwined. You need to step in where others have stepped out, where their teachers have stepped out, you step in. And the other part is, has my opinion changed with regards to the US? When I was a field journalist, I was invited by the State Department. This is something that taxpayer money is used to invite journalists from developing countries to go and cover and see the US and see the American dream. And then you realize that the American dream is just a war machine. That feeds you the family and football and consumerist lifestyle that just masks the truth. And they make Americans feel like they're on their own. So they act like they're on their own. So that they act like they're not sharing this world with the rest of us. And they act like they're entitled. And they act like they're constantly under threat. And I remember the condescending manner by which, and I'm usually a talker, but then during that State Department visit, I was just listening, observing. They gave me a per diem. We went to a cheesecake factory. They took us to a football game. They took us around the CNN.
Proper American experience.
We went and saw Mitt Romney give a speech.
Oh, sorry.
What I mean? It's just it's so unreal. And you just go, do you know what's happening outside of here? Are you aware? They don't want to be aware. They have football. They have family. They have food. They just have an American dream. Yeah. And this is what happened. And this is what I kept on seeing, And then the last thing, the guy was asking a lot of the reporters, what was your, and it's a type of visa that they give you. So you're not allowed to live in the US for a certain period of time. You have to go back to your own country for 4 years, but then you can come back to the US. And this is why they win you over, go do your journalism back home, talk about how America's just great. And then maybe you can go back to the US, and they nitpick who was more susceptible. And the end of the meeting, I just said a whole bunch of criticism. And the guy who was so nice at the beginning, I remember he was this white-haired, typical American man who was just the head of the program. He was so angry at Rania. He came to me and he was like inches away from my face. And he's like, this program was not meant for you. Who recommended you to this program? And he couldn't mask it anymore. He couldn't mask it anymore. Because they really dislike the ones who speak like them, but are not on their script. And this is why, again, empowerment is so important, because when you yourself are colonized and you put something on a pedestal, you start wanting to be a part of this.
Yeah.
You want to be the dean of a university. You want to be, they give you the trinkets to go with it. They give you that carrot. And that's
also,
why.
Well, go
No,
ahead.
no,
Well, I was
no,
just going to say, there's also the allure of like growing up watching Hollywood films. Like America can look really enticing, but please finish what you were going to say.
No, but by the way, that's true. America is great. There are lots of Americans who are absolutely amazing. I'm not just, it's not just criticism for the sake of criticism, but you
Right.
need to be aware. Enjoy the Hollywood movie, but understand the message that's being sent to you. Listen to your favorite artist, but also own your identity. You
Yeah.
can hang out with the devil, but knowing yourself is a real shield to all of that. Listen, change your mind, even be aware, do your own research. Don't wait for an influenza ولا actor ولا ما اعرف ايه يقول لك انت عايزه تفكري ازاي وفكري انت. الله وحياة ربنا.
No, it's a really good. No, it's a really good point. That's funny though that the program they had you into had the opposite impact on you, and then the guy got really.
بصي opposite disaster, waste of money. بس كلت برجر وكلت بيتزا وسافرت شفت فوتبول جيم. لا انبسطت يعني انبسطت
You're hilarious.
بس
You're
بمزاجي.
hilarious. Yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
بس
No, good for
بمزاجك.
you. Good for you though, because a lot of people would be really taken in by that, and it can be very attractive and appealing, and the idea of the U.S. And I mean, look, I see my own family is very much like this. They all want to go there. They all have, a lot of them have gone there, and they get there, and it's a lot harder than they think it's going to be. Because I think you make a really good point about the U.S. people are on their own. They're on their own in a cultural sense, and they're also on their own financially because the U.S. has zero safety net. So it's like a dog eat dog world in a very real way.
And they always play both parts, they always they don't put their eggs in one basket. But right now, it's I this is something that I believe is the irony of it all. What the entity which they are most protecting is what is going to be their demise.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear the rest, you can access it by becoming a Breakthrough News member at patreon.com/breakthrough news.